So the infinite game is not the absence of finite games. You can absolutely have arbitrary goals. And remember, most of the financial goals we set, a few people sat in a room and said, what do we want our annual goal to be? And somebody says, let's make it this number. And somebody goes, no, let's make it this number. And that becomes the number, right? There's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing. In fact, it's necessary. Human beings are very tangibly driven animals. We like counting things. It's actually important. Can you imagine running a marathon without mile markers? It would actually be unnerving. So metrics help us measure speed and distance, which is very, very important. But we have to remember that when we hit a metric or don't hit a metric, the game has not been won or lost. They're markers, right? And that's the important part. So we have to stop thinking about business like a race or a game and start thinking of it like a lifestyle. So for example, I want to be healthy, right? So there are many things I have to do to be healthy. I have to eat right, I have to exercise, I have to, get enough sleep, I have to nurse my personal relationships. There's probably 15 or 20 other things. Can't do all of those things well all the time. It's a striving. Same in business. We have, we have product, we have marketing, we have sales, we have leadership. Can't do them all right all the time. It's a striving. But we can set arbitrary goals like I want to lose X amount of weight by X date, right? And every day I'm going to stand on the scale. Some days I'll feel good and some days I'll feel bad. And when I hit my goal, I'm excited. But the problem is I have to keep exercising for the rest of my life. Like it hasn't ended simply because I hit a goal. And that's important to recognize. But what I find more interesting is what happens if you miss the goal? And the answer is nothing. Nothing happens. In fact, very often we just miscalculated the time it'll take to achieve it. So if you're doing all the right things and you see the trend data is on path and you just lose that weight in a month later or 2 months later, okay, you're healthier now, even missing the goal, than you were before. The bad news, where it gets dangerous is when we're so obsessed with that goal that I'll starve myself and stop drinking water to hit the goal, and I'm actually unhealthy. And companies do that. So the goals are good, and celebrating the wins are great, and there are wins. That's fantastic. But we have to remember that if we miss the goal, the question is, what's the trend data? Like, are we a healthy company? Are we taking care of each other? And I'll just go back a few years ago. Ginny Rometty, IBM missed its numbers. And Ginny Rometty made an internal video, which of course leaked, made an internal video that was sent out to the entire IBM that basically shit all over the sales team publicly. And I remember talking to somebody at IBM and I'm like, what's with that video? And they're like, oh, so glad I'm not in sales, right? And basically berated them for missing the numbers. This was the first time IBM had missed its numbers, the first quarter in 69 quarters. And the CEO's response was to berate a team, but berate an entire division, right? After 69 quarters, they missed their first one. Guess what happened after that berating of the team and what happened to the culture, and guess how many times they missed it after that? It continued. In other words, it's fine. It's fine to miss it. It's a game. It's a long game. So I think that's where we get confused, which is we become obsessed with we missed our numbers once. Well, we're doing fantastic. So I think that's where it's just about keeping things in perspective. That's where the infinite mindset helps. It's just about perspective. I mean, you play the infinite game for the good of the game. Right? Which is you're in the hospitality industry for the good of the hospitality industry and for the good of all business. And the best companies, the ones we love and admire, right? They share. It's the ones who are protective, of what because they think it's a competitive advantage. And what they fail to recognize is implementation is the competitive advantage, not the idea itself. Execution is the competitive advantage. Yeah. But the ability to share the things you believe in and the things you have figured out for the good of business, because we don't just believe your employees should be treated well, we believe all employees should be treated well, And if you figured things out, so I'll tell you a story. So Bob Chapman is the CEO of a company called Barry Wehmiller. It's a company I've written and spoken about quite a lot, especially in my book, Leaders Eat Last.
Great guy.
And you've had the opportunity to meet Bob. Bob is one of those unique, remarkable leaders. And the way I met Bob is he'd read Start With Why, and he sent me a letter and saying, I'm building the kind of company that you've written about. And I said, I want to meet you. And so we had lunch in Los Angeles, this famous lunch where we were scheduled for an hour, and we both cleared our schedules and spent the next 3 hours together because we loved each other. And I didn't believe him. I said, I talk about an ideal. It's not realistic. It's a strive. He says, no, I have it. I said, well, I want to see it to believe it. So he picked me up in his plane from New York, and we spent 3 days flying around the country to all these different factories. And it's a manufacturing company, right? This is blue collar, some union, some non-union manufacturing, right? And what I saw absolutely astonished me. It blew me away. I've never seen anything like it. And he didn't prepare anything. He let me roam the factory floor without I could talk to anybody. I could ask anybody any question I wanted. There was no window dressing. And I was absolutely blown away. And I'll just tell you one quick story that really exemplifies. And this one's, I haven't written or spoken about this one. So I haven't talked about this one. So they have a machine that was getting old. This is a factory, big machine.
Yeah.
That's getting old and needs to be replaced. Traditionally, how large machines are replaced is somebody in procurement fills out a list of requirements and then goes in the market to find a machine that fits a budget, right? That's usually how it's done. That's not how they did it. They went to the factory floor to the two guys who work on that machine. One who's pretty young, in his early 20s, one who's got more experience. Neither of them have college educations. I think one had a GED. And they said to them, you need to replace your machine. You have a budget of $750,000. Go. And these two guys travel around the country looking at...
And never came back.
Exactly. That's it. They now live in Tahiti. They gave him a budget, not the money.
That was smart.
They flew around the country. They looked at new and used machines. And the people selling the machines said they'd never seen anything like it. They've never had anybody show up in overalls climbing in the machine. Usually it's a guy in a suit showing up with a clipboard.
Right.
They ended up spending $650,000, so they were really excited that they saved the company money, and that's their machine, right? That I can guarantee that machine will never break down, right? And the trust, and it makes perfect sense, but this is what one of the things that Bob says. Bob says is, we trust people who have college educations who work in a back office, and we don't trust people who don't have college educations. What about their education makes them trustworthy or untrustworthy? He says, I know some pretty dishonest MBAs, and that's one of the things that Bob did. But the point was, I went on this wonderful tour with Bob, and then we finally went back to their corporate headquarters in St. Louis, and the team that had sort of built this culture was sitting around a table, and they were all looking at me like this, going, isn't this amazing? Like, we did what you wrote about. And I sat there and I said, I think you're the most selfish organization I've ever met in my entire life. And they all were sort of stunned that I would say that. I said, look, I think it's amazing what you've built. I think it's absolutely incredible. But how selfish of you that you only offer this kind of thing that you've built for 6,000 people. What about the millions of people who hate their jobs, who don't want to go to work every day? What are you doing for them? And it was from that conversation that Bob opened the doors. They now offer training. They now offer tours. Like Bob he wrote a book about it. He's now on the speaking circuit.
Yeah.
He's out there. He's now a public figure. And he's promoting this new way of leading and this new way of thinking. Leader means other people follow what you do. And if your brand stands for something that people want to copy and you're leading the way, then clearly you are competing against yourself and not them. But let them compete against you. And I think that the Four Seasons is one of those brands. And I can't think of anyone in the hospitality who has ever done that, who's ever reached outside of their own industry, that others want to be more like them. You can pick your own worthy rivals. You can pick any company for any reason and say, they're better than us. What can we learn from them? I'll give you a real life story that really captured this for me. And it's in the book, but I'll tell it to you. I spoke at a education summit for Microsoft, and then a few months later, I was invited to speak at an education summit for Apple. At the Microsoft summit, this back in Steve Ballmer days, in the Microsoft summit, the vast majority of the presentations by the executives spent most of their time talking about how to beat Apple. At the Apple Summit, 100% of the presentations were how to help teachers teach and how to help students learn. One was obsessed with beating their competition. The other one was obsessed with advancing their mission. At the end of my talk at Microsoft, they gave me a gift. They gave me the Zune when it was a thing. This was Microsoft's response to the iPod. And this little piece of technology, I have to say, was really very, very good. It was quite a good little piece of technology. It didn't work on an Apple, so I couldn't use it. That's a different problem. But it was very good. So at the end of my Apple talk, I was sharing a taxi with an Apple executive, and I couldn't help myself. I just had to stir the pot. And I turned to him, I go, Microsoft gave me their new Zune, and it is so much better than my iPod Touch. And he turned to me and he said, I have no doubt. And the conversation was over. Because he understood, this was an infinite-minded organization, he understood that sometimes your competitor will do something better than you, and sometimes you'll be better than them. There's no such thing as winning or losing. There's only ahead and behind. And where Microsoft was obsessed with beating Apple, Apple was obsessed with outdoing itself. And so the great irony is just a couple years after that, Apple released the iPhone. So where Microsoft was obsessing with how to make a better iPod, Apple was on to the next thing, didn't even care. And that's the whole idea, which is absolutely study and learn from the other players. You see, I don't even call them competitors. The other players in your industry. See what they're doing better. Like I said, it reveals your weaknesses and say, we can do better than ourselves. Grow. Eventually, they no longer become worthy of comparison anymore because you advance yourselves. But the whole idea is Apple was thinking about what they could do next, not how they could beat Microsoft to get more market share for an iPod.